Hey guys, Gongrongzong here. Have you ever thought for a second, I'm sick and tired of Blizzard ruining all these characters by whacking them with the villain stick, turning them into straight up evil versions of themselves. They are so much more complex than that. Well, me too, and so I'd like to propose how Blizzard could make its storytelling, and especially the upcoming faction war, so much better. However, in order to get a better perspective of this, we must first take a look at our dear Draenei and Mag'har friends in the alternate universe. Just as a heads up, if you're new to the channel and you enjoyed the video, consider hitting that subscribe button, as I'll always be doing more of such videos as new WoW content gets released. So we know from last week's data mining that the Mag'har Orcs on Draenor are in conflict with the AU Draenei. This basically stems from the Draenei turning into zealots, very much like the Scarlet Crusade in our world, desiring to forcefully convert the Mag'har Orcs over to the light. I personally think that this development is amazing, not only from its surprising twist that none of us ever saw coming, but from a storytelling point of view. Blizzard's intention to make this entire situation morally grey, so to speak, helps to develop both sides into something more than their typical black and white good versus evil motive. Now, I don't believe that the Draenei or that the potential Naru directing them is evil. Let's not forget, 35 years have passed since we last saw them, and considering how all the events of WoW have lasted only about a decade or so in total, a lot can actually happen in 35 years on Draenor. In fact, we do know that the initial years between the Mag'har and the Draenei were good and peaceful. They worked well together and there was unity and kinship. However, as to be expected, the Draenei began introducing the light to the Orcs. They started to get pushy, aggressive even, and over the course of a few decades, it has led up to the situation we encounter today. Why would the Draenei do such a thing? To go to the extent of even inflicting violence and inciting war with the Orcs just to convert them? Well, let's not forget, we have actually seen such a scenario occur in our own real world during the time of the Crusades, a series of wars sanctioned by the Latin Church during the medieval period. Many of the knights felt like they were doing good in their battles against the Muslims in the Mediterranean regions, with some even seeing it as atonement for their sins and a way to guarantee their ascension into heaven. The Draenei are simply doing what they believe is right. Similar to the example of the Crusades, it is not so much evil as it is more a form of colonialism. When the British first began colonizing the world, they viewed all the other races with extreme prejudice, of which the only way to enlightenment and civilization was through their teachings. In a similar vein, the Draenei are a civilization that is thousands upon thousands of years old, with technology and magics light years ahead of the Mag'har Orcs. It is easy to see how they view these Orcs as immature children, a young race that needs a guiding hand to thrive. To make matters worse, this young race seems to always be fighting amongst one another. What is this brutal and primitive practice of Mag'har? Why the constant need to fight each other and declare war amongst the clans? What are these horrific rituals of self-mutilation? To the Draenei, the Mag'har are basically savages, and they need the light as a guiding force in order to develop into something better. In the eyes of the Draenei, they are basically trying to help them, and the Mag'har just seem to be rejecting their generous help from every angle. Just like a parent trying to teach a child, gentle coaxing and advice eventually turn into force feeding and punishment. The parent knows what is best for the child, and so it's their way or the highway. The child must learn, even if the process is painful for now. If not, they will be lost forever. What may sound as redemption to one easily becomes oppression to another. Notice that up to this point I have yet to mention Yrel, and for good reason. We do not yet know if Yrel is leading this campaign of conversion, or perhaps she passed away early on and the remaining Draenei turned fanatical without her leadership, or maybe she's still alive and outrightly against this entire war. But that's the crux of this entire matter. Yrel is not actually needed for the alternate universe Draenei to become morally grey and commit heinous acts on their own. In other words, character assassination does not need to happen, an act that Blizzard has seen to be forming a pattern for in order to simplify and push forth a conflict between the Horde and Alliance. Let's look at some of the individuals that Blizzard has character assassinated, turning them from either good to evil, vice versa, or from complex to overly simplified. Garrosh Hellscream is one of the main ones. In a key quest in Stone Talon Mountains, Garrosh is seen to conduct himself with a strict code of honor, disposing a fellow Orc commander that took the war campaign a step too far by wiping out a Tauren village. In this particular quest, he seemed much more like Varrock Southang than the Garrosh that we are familiar with. In the novel, during the bombing of Theramore, Garrosh actually held his forces back while allowing the civilians to empty out of the city. It was never his intention to conduct mass murder, but simply destroy the Alliance fort that was so close to Orgrimmar. However, from how they portrayed Garrosh in-game, he is simply a homicidal, maniacal tyrant that is on a rampage to destroy everything for his own personal power, justified by some low-key daddy issues that seem to emotionally account for all his actions. Why was this done? Why was an Orc with so much pride in himself and his traditions, an Orc that had wanted his whole life to correct the wrongs of his father, an Orc that was tutored directly under Thrall, turned into an absolute monster? Well, the reason is clear. Blizzard wanted a faction war in Mists of Pandaria. Several big bads had been recently dealt with, and whenever there is no longer a big bad, the Horde and Alliance must fight each other for obvious gameplay reasons. However, in the process, a main character always seems to have to take the fall and be stripped of their dignity and backstory. The next one in line would of course be Sylvanas. With the Legion dealt with, Blizzard wants to incite a faction war again, and simply slaps the villain stick onto a character that had so much development since her introduction in Warcraft 3. For those of us that have read the novels, we know she is not inherently evil. She may be selfish and uncaring, but she's not inherently evil. And yet, she has now become the big bad for us to take down, with me wishing with all my might that she doesn't turn into a lame raid boss like Garrosh. So here's the big question. Why couldn't Blizzard have conducted a similar process with the playable races that we have, just like how they're handling the AU Draenei and Mag'har conflict? Do the current factions and races need their leaders to turn evil in order for a fight to ensue? Does every Horde war chief need to blatantly turn into a villain, ignoring their entire past just to incite a conflict? No, I believe that it does not need to be. In fact, I believe that each playable race has more than enough on their own to naturally incite a fight. So let's go down the line and explore each and every race to see how, like the AU Draenei and Mag'har Orcs, they might be able to precipitate a fight that has the potential to develop into a faction war in Battle for Azeroth. Let's start with the races that we're more familiar with first. The Orcs. The Orcs of our world in the new Horde that Thrall founded have changed pretty drastically from the original ones back home in Outland. However, two simple reasons could easily incite them to violence, namely the appeal of a good fight and never backing down from one, and also their dislike of the Night Elves since the time that Grom encountered them. This dynamic is demonstrated no better than in the battleground Warsong Gulch, which epitomizes the fight between Orcs and Night Elves. The Horde does not always need to be in full control of all their disparate groups. A splinter or fringe group such as the Warsong Outriders could easily incite a conflict, with more than enough impact to contribute to or entirely blow up into a full faction war. But sadly, Blizzard has seemingly forgotten about the iconic battle for lumber resources in Ashenvale, to the extent whereby Warsong Gulch doesn't even seem to exist anymore in the storyline. Next, let's look at their counterpart, the humans. There is so much potential here that sometimes it boggles me why Blizzard will go the route of making Anduin a goody-two-shoes victim in this entire conflict. We have already seen in the Legion Epilogue cinematic that Anduin is potentially not in full control of Stormwind, much less the entire Alliance. Greymane and Matthias Shaw can easily act as rogue elements to incite the conflict. The SI7 have already involved themselves against the Goblins in the mining of Azerite in Silithus, an event which can easily lead to a full-blown war. In addition, the phrase of "only one of us wanted this war" would have so much more depth and excitement to it if it were directed at Greymane instead of Sylvanas. This would allow Anduin to remain as a more complex character that is reflective of both his past and his father, someone who has to battle against internal conflicts, the trauma of his father's death, and the weight of the throne at such a young age. But instead, Blizzard chooses to oversimplify Anduin's motivations, making his character in-game a saint and largely unrelatable to us. Now let's look at a slightly more difficult one, the Tauren. The Tauren are the question mark in the Horde, having no relevance to its warmongering or blight-flinging fueled tendencies, staying on only because of a commitment that their former chieftain made to the Horde's original war chief. But this doesn't necessarily need to be the case. The Tauren have all the potential in the world to instigate conflict within the Horde itself, with countless numbers of opportunities to stand up against the Horde's practices. Large numbers of splinter groups of Tauren could easily break away from the Horde, just like how Southang has done in the Siege of Lordaeron, outrightly rebelling against the questionable affronts against nature that the Horde is regularly conducting. Why in the world Blizzard would choose for the Tauren to remain absolutely silent on such matters is staggering. Internal conflicts within the Horde could easily spill over into a theme of alliance meddling, which we have already seen in how Jaina and Anduin helped Bane to retake Thunderbluff following the Grim Totem betrayal, contributing heavily to friction between and within the factions. Talking about the Tauren, let's flip over to the Alliance side for a while and talk a bit about the Dwarves. The Dwarves have already incited a major conflict with the Tauren in the Barrens, digging up artifacts in a site the Tauren considered to be holy, and destroying an entire Tauren village in the process. In keeping with the typical greedy fantasy of the Dwarves, they always seem to be digging far too deep, unearthing terrible evils in the process. It would be a simple and natural process to use the Dwarves as an entry point to a faction conflict without needing to character assassinate any of the main leaders. They could potentially dig up an ancient Tauren artifact and claim Finders Keepers, causing a massive brawl to break out at Baal Modan. Extremists in the faction could try to get revenge against the Tauren for halting their excavation efforts and attack even more of their villagers, causing a Camp Torajo 2.0 to occur. Or they could begin to aggressively expand Baal Modan, which is supposed to be the second home of the Dwarves, encroaching upon more and more of the Horde's lands. The possibilities are endless, and it again baffles me why Blizzard would outrightly choose to ignore this conflict rather than seamlessly integrating it in. Since we're talking about greed and digging, let's take a look at the Goblins. The Goblins would be another fantastic entry point to instigate a faction conflict, as we have already witnessed how Gallywix's greed sparked off the entire Azerite mining event. More could be built upon this quadruple-chinned devious goblin to easily incite a new war. As quoted by him, "If the world was gonna split in half tomorrow, I'll buy the Dark Portal, slap a toll booth on it, and charge refugees the last of their pocket change, the rings off their fingers, a bite of their sandwiches, and a contractual obligation to build me a rocket palace in the skies of Nagran. It's the Goblin way. Supply and demand, deal with it." He is someone driven by simple greed, nothing more, nothing less. The Goblin's very own inclusion in the Horde could be a straightforward way to spark off a conflict with the Alliance in more ways than one. Now we could go through the remaining races one by one, but I'm pretty sure that we'll end up with a similar outcome, and I think you guys get my point by now. The Night Elves could easily return to their ferocious and savage roots that we experienced in Warcraft 3, and take the fight on their own to the Horde. The Worgen could, and in fact should, in my opinion, return back to their bestial origins, rather than turning into the grumpy, emo puppy portrayal that Greymane is currently adopting. The Dark Spear could incite some form of voodoo madness that is totally within the realm of possibility within troll culture. Splinter groups in the Blood Elves could decide to yet again chase after a new font of magic, perhaps even at the expense of the Alliance. The Gnomes could invent some sort of doomsday weapon that tips the balance of power just like how Azerite has. And not much else needs to be said of our dear Forsaken. And most importantly, in the entire process, the war would be able to start without needing to destroy multiple major characters. Now, I'm not claiming that any one of these events would automatically lead to a faction war. As it can be seen in Battle for Azeroth, a catastrophic event probably needs to occur for a full-scale war to break out, such as the burning of Teldrassil. However, when many of them occur simultaneously, it can easily culminate into an all-out war. Let's not forget, World War I was triggered off by an assassination, so it doesn't require that much for multiple parties to be dragged into combat. All in all, I strongly believe that Blizzard can illustrate a better story in-game, rather than leaving out major plot points for the novels to cover, something that barely a fraction of the player base even reads. Gameplay will always come first, that is true, but we're only human, and stories are what naturally brings us together. A good story can only help to enhance every player's immersion in the game. This is all just my own opinion though. Definitely feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Azeroth.